software engineering instructor here at App Academy, and I will just go ahead and get started there. So, I am, hopefully you can see my screen. I'll try to keep the chat open. I'll also try to keep my eye on the participants tab to get to everything that we need. So, hi y'all. I'm here to talk about diversity and the impact that diversity has on bias in design and bias in our technologies that have real world impact. So going ahead and getting started, who am I? I'm a bioethicist by trade. So I have a master's of science in bioethics from Columbia, and I wrote my thesis on policy and clinical care interactions. So looking much more at like life or death scenarios and the impact that gender and race play on those particular interactions. So if healthcare is ever an interest of yours and healthcare and its technical interactions, reach out. I'm a software engineer. I'm a teacher. I've taught lots of different things, and now I have taught some of you at App Academy. And last but not least, because I think it's good to share some personal information, I'm an outdoorsist, which I like better than outdoorsman. So ground rules, we will have some breakout room discussion. We'll also have some large group discussion. If you choose to share something, which you absolutely don't have to, but if anything does get shared that's a little bit more personal, we'll keep it in this room. So anything shared here or in a breakout room stays in that breakout room or stays in this main room. We're going to use I statements. Totally fine to have different opinions. Just make sure that you're speaking for yourself and not speaking for those around you. And last but not least is general Zoom guidelines. I'm going to watch the participants tab. I will commit to that. So if you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you. I will try to keep an eye on the chat, but it's a little bit harder to do while screen sharing. So if you want an answer to something or you want to jump in, go ahead and raise your hand in the participants tab. When you do go to answer a question or ask a question, please state your name so that one, I know who I'm talking to, but two, I know the correct way to pronounce it the next time that I see it. And last but not least, general Zoom guidelines, just make sure that you're muted when you're not speaking. So let's go ahead and get into it. What is implicit bias? I will have my eyes in the chat. I know that this is kind of a hot topic right now, so you probably have some opinions on that. Go ahead and answer in the chat, what is bias? What is implicit bias? If you have any experience with technical bias, go ahead and throw that out there. Cool. I have my eyes on the chat, but I'm not sure anyone's chatting. That's cool. Yes, we're biased without explicitly stating so. Thank you, Chris and Jared. We all have biases in our own life experiences, biases we're unaware of. Thanks, Monarch. Yeah, so absolutely. Implicit bias is this idea of like things that we're not consciously going through, but internal preferences that we have that are defined by our culture. So everyone has implicit biases. It's not really about like being a good person and getting rid of your implicit biases. It's about recognizing that we have them and that these are inherent flaws with the way that we interact with the world, considering the way the world's built today. I have a bias definition. I'm going to skip over it. I feel like we hit what we needed to hit. So today I'm going to be narrowing in a little bit more from that, this like broad idea of implicit bias and bias that we have to, as a software engineer, we have technical bias. So what is that? How do we interact with it? How can we solve for it? All that jazz. So technical bias is issues in technical design. So it's hardware limitations, software limitations, and then peripherals. Cool. So we're going to watch a clip from a YouTube video that I feel like is an excellent demonstration of why this actually matters. Why do we care about technical bias? So I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually share that YouTube screen. And we're going to watch about 1.5 minutes of it. Cool. Can y'all see this? Someone say yes in the chat or give me a thumbs up in the participants tab. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So let's watch this.
My coworker Wanda and I are sitting in front of an HP Media Smart computer. State-of-the-art computer, wouldn't you say?
I'd say.
We're using the face tracking software, so it's supposed to follow me as I move. No following. Not really. not really follow me. I back up. I get really, really close to try to let the camera recognize me. Not happening. Now, my white coworker, Wanda, is about to slide in the frame. You will immediately see what I'm talking about. One.
All right, hi, I saw the audio cut out, so I'm gonna rewind a little bit so that people can catch that audio. That was my bad, I apologize.
Interfering with the computer's ability to follow me. As you can see, I do this, no following. Not really follow me. I back up. I get really, really close to try to let the camera recognize me. Not happening. Now, my white coworker, Wanda, is about to slide in the frame. You will immediately see what I'm talking about. Wanda, if you would, please.
Sure.
Now, as you can see, the camera is panning to show Wanda's face. It's following her around. But as soon as my blackness enters the frame, which I will sneak into the frame. I'm sneaking in. I'm in there.
That's it. It's
and
over.
There we go. It stopped. My hands are here. Wanda, please get back in the frame. Get back in. As soon as white Wanda appears, the camera moves.
Okay, so we kind of got the idea that I wanted to get out of that. That's not great. If you send a technology to market and it really works super well for white faces, that's awesome. You're missing out on a huge portion of the market. And I would definitely consider that bad PR. So this is really problematic. But there are lots of different examples of this. So this is one example of where a product went to market that had some pretty serious issues with it, pretty serious design flaws. But let's look at some other examples. So this is from New Zealand's passport sign up. You can remotely get a passport in New Zealand. You have to upload a photo of yourself, and then an algorithm checks and says does this photo meet the passport requirements for a passport picture in New Zealand? This is not great. Clearly, whoever was testing out this photo and writing this algorithm just was not testing it in the right places. So clearly his eyes are open. We got some flaws here. And this is really bad because this is for passports. This is something that is actually a government ID. Yes, I agree. Very well dressed. Okay, cool. Here's another one. I will keep my eyes on the chat for this one, but Microsoft Connect thought that it was ready for market. But in 2010, one of their employees took it home to play around with it, and something went really wrong with it. So answers in the chat. Anyone know or have guesses with what was wrong with it? The person was invisible on the screen, learned to kill. That would be really funny. Hopefully not. It couldn't register certain people. It absolutely couldn't register certain people. Let's actually, so what went wrong with this product is that it was designed in a lab of men that were making this product. So when this employee took it home, it only picked up the male figure. So the husband would get in front of the camera, could totally interact, everything worked super well, and then the woman would come in or the kids would come in and the camera was like, I don't see anything. That's so crazy. So big oof, clearly not what we're going for here with our technologies. We want people to be able to interact with them. And the fact that it was designed and tested by the people in this lab, they were like, boom, this product's awesome. It's ready to go to market. Let's go with it. So other examples, voice recognition technology works better with male voices, lower pitches, louder voices, and works best with American English accents. So, few problems with this. One, you might have seen Silicon Valley, where there's this car navigation system that takes the guy to a totally deserted island because it can't understand what they're saying. That's problematic, but that's really true. Car navigation systems are a huge one that just work better with male voices. So thus far, car navigation systems have said, well, we just need to teach women, we need to teach them to talk louder, talk slower, enunciate more, and get closer to the microphone. If you have to teach your customer how to interact with your technology, it's probably not going that well, and that's fairly problematic. But even more problematic than that is this idea of accents and where this technology gets used. So in your car navigation system, you fix it, whatever. But hopefully at some point you've called a bank or you've called a healthcare provider and you need to go through this whole phone tree of like, tell me your account number. Are you calling about this or this or this? And it works a lot better if you are a native English speaker, specifically if you're a native English speaker with an American accent, and if you're a man. So it can be unbelievably, incredibly frustrating and can't even get you the information that you're looking for if you don't meet those characteristics. Another really bad example is in Australia, as part of getting citizenship, you take an English test. And so they had essentially like an automated English test. You call, it asks you a bunch of questions, you respond, and then it gives you a ranking of like, how fluent are you in English? And there was a Scottish woman, so English was her first language, but she's got a Scottish accent, called in, took the whole test, and it said she speaks 74% fluently. So she's like conversational in English. That's clearly problematic, big issues there. And she was unable to get citizenship and lots of things did not work. Last few examples, Amazon tried to create a hiring algorithm that took in a bunch of resumes, spit out 5, and those were the 5 best candidates for the job. It had a very, very strong gender preference to the extent that they actually tried to fix the algorithm and they said, ignore gendered words, she, he, woman, man. It also had a preference against all women universities. So it said, don't pay attention to those universities, let go of all of it. And it still had a really strong gender preference. And so eventually Amazon just scrapped the whole project and said, that's not really what we're looking for, hopefully, thank God. But there's really huge issues with algorithms and technology. They are learning from data. And the historical data for the tech industry in particular is men, and particularly white and Asian men. So when you try to teach a bot or an algorithm based off of that data, it works exceptionally well and will highlight resumes that have historically done really well, white Asian men. Not only that, this particular algorithm had a name preference. I think it might have been Chris, where there were a lot of Chris's that got hired and the algorithm went, oh, I see an awesome connection there. Someone applied with the name Chris, they're probably really excellent for this job. So last but not least, getting to much more real world examples, courts use algorithms. Courts use algorithms for sentencing recommendations and things like that. And the court algorithms that have been used, a lot of them have been found to be quite racist. So this is one fairly racist example. Another example was there was a man, I think in Alabama, a Black man that was sentenced to what was seen to be like a very heavy-handed sentence. And it was because an algorithm had predicted his rate of recidivism and said, this is the sentence that we recommend. So he was sentenced based off this algorithm recommendation. And he said, that's not fair. I would like to see how the algorithm reached this conclusion because I don't think it's accurate. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court heard this case. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court said, yes, we agree that probably wasn't fair. It's going to go back to a lower court and they'll redecide your sentence. However, no, you're not allowed to see the algorithm. It's proprietary information and that court is still allowed to use that algorithm. So it's not great. What we code has real world consequences. So why do we have these issues? You can raise a hand or you can answer in the chat. What's up with this? Why do we have so many easy examples of technology that behaves badly? Algorithms that are used in jury selection tools are also usually terrible. Yes, that is also true, Adrian. I'm not gonna lie, there are so many examples of things that we think are good that have gone wildly awry that it's hard to really distill a few out of them. But answers in the chat, why are there so many examples of this? People make them, absolutely. Limited diversity in people that are employed in tech, limited data. Yeah. No. So lots of these. people that make them have implicit biases. There's a lack of diversity. There's absolutely ignorance, and there's not a great feedback loop between who's making the technology and who is using the technology. So issues all over the place. But let's talk a little bit about what those issues are and how we can fix them. So right now there's a massive access gap. So there's an education gap and an access gap to technology, meaning that it's hard to get into tech. If you don't have access to a computer, if you don't have access to the internet, you're not going to be able to get into tech. So that limits what tech's pipeline looks like. And unfortunately, those access gaps, as we were going to talk about, line up a lot along educational and socioeconomic lines. So we have really bad diversity when it comes to that front. Then this leads into our bad diversity in the industry, which is that the designers and the builders of technology do not reflect what the actual population looks like. The I methodology we designed for ourselves. This isn't actually a bad thing. This totally makes sense, logically speaking, that we would build something that works well for us because we know ourselves really well. It's quite easy to build something that's good for us to interact with and all of those different things. But if you're on a team of 20 and everyone's building for themselves, and it just so happens that everyone also has the same background, the same characteristics, the same experiences, at that point, the product's not going too well. And last but not least is design stereotypes. We're software engineers, but we'll talk about designers a little bit here too. Designs are built for stereotypes, from color palette to sound effects to the way that it's interacted with. When tech is being designed, are designed for a stereotype. What is a gamer? What is someone that's interested in ed tech? Things like that. Cool. So really specifically, narrowing down into technical bias, what is that impact? So we have hardware biases. We can talk about this a little bit. Hopefully some of you play video games. I don't, but I know a lot about the controllers. This is the idea that our hardware itself can be biased. There are video game controllers that have the assumption that you have 5 fingers on 2 hands, and that's how you interact with the game, that's how you play the game. But there's a lot of people that is not their reality. That's not the scenario that they're interacting with. So hardware is a great example. We need our hardware to be accessible for people to interact with them. When we get to code, we get into algorithm bias. And lastly, design. So accessibility, UX and UI. Can screen readers read it? Can people that are colorblind be able to parse the information that's available on the screen? Things like that. Cool. Okay, so let's talk some more statistics about why this is all turned out the way that it has. So first of all, 90% of Americans have internet access at home. That's pretty high, 90%, but that means that 10% of Americans do not have internet access at home. 82% of those that make less than 30K have internet access at home. So we're beginning to see how those socioeconomic lines impact tech, who's able to interact with it, who's able to build with it, all of that. We also see that there are some associations with the higher you get into education, the more likely you are to have internet access. Actually, I'm going to go back and talk about that one more time. So if 71% of those without a high school diploma have home internet access, that means around 30% don't. That's a bunch of customers that you're not going to be able to get feedback with if they buy a piece of hardware, because how are they going to interact with you? But that also means that that's 30% of these individuals that won't be able to get into tech, that won't be able to come in and build with that I mentality of what design and what process would work best for them. And then 20% is about the number of Americans that do not have a smartphone. A lot of individuals these days interact, particularly when you look at socioeconomic lines, individuals that can't afford laptops or computers use their smartphone. They use a smartphone to apply for jobs. They use a smartphone to interact with people, to communicate, everything like that. So 20% of people don't even have a smartphone. And I think this is an important statistic to talk about. Approximately 45% of Americans have an iPhone. So a lot of developers work on Apple products. Not all developers, but a lot of developers work on Apple products. I was running a workshop not that long ago, a training for a technical team at an HR tech company, and 100% of their engineers had an iPhone. And they were building out a product that was to be used on any smartphone, and they recently found out that their code that they'd written to be mobile friendly really only worked on the iPhone. So they're actually not reaching their end users. And when they went through and they looked at what their end users were using, their end users were using smartphones, they were not using iPhones. So there's a pretty huge socioeconomic top of it, lots of iPhones, below that, lots of other types of smartphones. And so if you're an engineer, you're on an iPhone, you're building out a product that is on lots of different app markets, things like that, you need to make sure that you're designing it for the right mobile user. We also have some pretty big diversity problems. 6% of technical workers at Apple are Black compared to the population in the United States, which is 13%. So 6% is pretty shameful, kind of from any perspective, but especially if you look at population, pretty not great. Approximately 23% of roles are filled by women at Google and Facebook. This is not technical roles. This is overall roles. So 23% of overall roles are filled by women. And a lot of those roles are not technical roles. The number just gets smaller and smaller and smaller the more you go into technical roles and the more you get into those that are actually building out products. And approximately 5% of technical roles are filled with Latinx. Going more into the design side of things, 11% of creative directors are women, but 73% of consumer purchase decisions are made by women. So if you're building out a product or working on a team where your end user is a consumer on the open market, 73% of those purchase decisions are made by women, despite the fact that those that are designing those products don't reflect that at all. And this one's pretty bad also. 73% of the design industry was white in, I think that's 2016. Yeah, 2016. So we have some real problems here about who's actually building technology, who's even making like the design decisions versus who's implementing it, all the way across the board, who's able to provide feedback, who's actually using it. Things aren't going that well. So this clearly has real world implications. We'll talk about a few of them, but then we'll kind of move into discussion about what we can do as software engineers to make sure that our team or we ourselves are not falling into that issue where someone's posting a YouTube video about a product that we built and saying it is racist or sexist or whatever it might be. So we design things for ourselves. That's all good. We design things for ourselves, but we need to acknowledge that as a reality. The tech that we build is not the perfect infallible technology. It is technology that we have built for us to use. We need to recognize that when we're designing something, we want to design it for our end user. So if you're designing for a really specific geographical location with a really specific like socioeconomic status and all of those different things, that's totally fine. You need your product to work really well for that group of people. But the vast majority of technologies are meant to be used by like indiscriminately across the United States, around the world, all that. So it's important to keep that in mind when you go to build out products, that the person that's interacting with it is probably not going to look or think exactly the way you will. And lastly, this came up a little earlier, but I think it's really important. AI learns from data. And a lot of the data that we have, we collected. And not only did we collect it, but the people that were in data science or in technology at the time collected it. Based on those statistics, you can probably guess, but a lot of those people were white men and then Asian men a little bit after that. So depending on your data set, there are biases that are baked into the data from the very beginning. A good example of this is the Apple Healthcare app went out on the iPhone, and they were like, this is a home base. You can have all of your healthcare information perfectly right here. It had nothing about periods, menstruation, ovulation, anything like that. It was just based on like historical data of like what did data scientists and engineers, what was the health data that was coming up for them that they wanted readily available at their fingertips. So went to market, they're like, this is awesome. And it failed to take into account something that is very relevant for the lives of about 50% of the population. Cool. So how do we fix it? I have a few proposals, and a few backings for those proposals, but really it comes down to a few different things. One is research. Who is our actual end user? We want to design and build technologies with the person that is going to use it in mind. Where did we get this data? So if we're going, okay, I'm going to design for the end user. My end user is someone that lives in Manhattan, New York. And then we go, okay, well, I live in Manhattan, New York. What are all the characteristics of someone in Manhattan, New York? You're not really doing great research. You need actual numbers, actual data, and you need to figure out where that data is coming from. So something like the census, knock on wood, should have pretty good data of what that population looks like. Something like I walk through New York City and this is what I see, probably less good research. Do other technologies like this have a problem? This is a huge one. This could save so many companies if they did it when going to build out a product. A lot of the times when you're building a product and launching it on the market, it's not the first product like that. Sometimes it is, you're groundbreaking, things happen. But a lot of the time you're building out a supplementary thing to something that already exists on the market. So doing market research and going, okay, I'm launching a facial recognition technology. I see that the facial recognition technologies in the market really are great with white faces and not good with faces of color. That should be something that you take into account in the build process and go, I know that I am ripe for this kind of error, this kind of mistake. Let me mitigate that as much as I can in the process of building it out. Diversity. Is this team diverse? What voices and perspectives are not represented? So if you're on an all-male team, awesome, cool. Go ask someone, go ask some questions, go get some women or gender non-conforming individuals to test it out and let you know what they think. If you are an all-white team, go get some people of color, figure out what's actually working there, listen to your end user. If your desired end user is the population of the United States, that's a humongous age demographic, racial demographic, ethnic demographic. That's a lot of different languages, educational experience. Even the language that is used across the United States changes. So make sure that you're doing that actual research and you're getting information from individuals that represent those groups. And the last is react and test. If something's gone awry, acknowledge that it's gone awry and then go to fix it. And if one of our tests failed, if we tried to bring a product to market like the Microsoft Kinect, employee brought it home and was like, hey, big problem, does not recognize women or children, they fixed it. They were like, all right, we're not gonna bring this to market. We need to get this figured out. So productive strategies, talked about this a little bit, but know your consumer, don't assume impartiality. We are not impartial, and we shouldn't operate on that assumption. And having conversations after brainstorming. This one's really important and I think is relevant for hackathons, for whatever team you come up with. Brainstorming by yourself can actually be really beneficial for not being impacted by the perspectives of others around you. But once you have brainstormed by yourself, go and have conversations. Talk it through verbally with someone. A lot of the time, you'll notice that things come to light just through that act. For those of you that know rubber duck debugging, a little bit of that thought of things. So what we're gonna do is we're going to talk about it. We're gonna do 10 minutes in a breakout room, and then we'll come back to the main room. We'll distill all of this information that we've come across with, and we will end this day with some recommendations that we can take home and take with us. So breakout rooms should be really easy. Start with brief intros. Hi, my name is, my pronouns, this is where I'm from. Then you can move on to the questions, and I'll put a facilitator in each group. If you do not want to participate in breakout rooms, that is totally fine. Just go to the breakout room or don't when breakout rooms open. Don't click join the breakout room and you can just hang out here until we come back for the main discussion. Cool. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Cool. Okay, in that case, these are the questions. I will go ahead and I will post them in the chat. Have you ever seen technical or design bias, or have you experienced it? what diversity of perspective do you bring to the table? What is the I that I am designing for? What are some things that you can look for and mitigate? And if you see that pain point, what's a good way to communicate it? Do you think we should be able to see the data that AI is learning from, or see the code in order to assess how it's actually working? Or do you think that information should remain proprietary? And last but not least, what are some ways to assess a product for technological bias? Cool. We'll go ahead and we can close breakout rooms, and we'll wait for everyone else to come trickle in.
Is it Paloma? How do you say your name?
Yes, my name is Paloma. So Paloma. Yeah.
What is that?
It is Spanish. It means dove in Spanish.
Aw, that's cute. Dove.
Nice. Okay, cool. Welcome back. Everyone is now back. Let's do group discussion. So the questions are posted in the chat. You should all have access to them. And rather than sharing my screen, because I'd prefer to see people, let's go through these questions. Anything that came up in your breakout room, anything that you've been thinking about, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you and we'll move through it that way. So have you ever seen technical bias or experienced it? Anything we want to share on that one? Yeah, Dave, go for it.
So I was sharing with the group that I'm tall, I'm white, and I've got a male voice, but you would think that technology worked really well for me, but all my friends make fun of me because I'm like a giant, and they're like, your phone doesn't work for giants. And it's just because I have a really deep voice. So a lot of times when I try to talk into voice recognition or try to sign into my bank, I'll have to scream at my phone for like 20 minutes because it doesn't recognize anything I say. So that's just, I guess, playing devil's advocate. I guess that's just the other side of the coin.
Yeah, absolutely. David D in the chat said cooking surfaces are made at different heights in different countries. So he got back pain cooking in China. There are a lot of really interesting things with like physical design flaws. You might remember there was supposed to be an all-female spacewalk, and then they were like, just kidding, we don't have 2 spacesuits that are small enough. So that didn't work super well and it got postponed. Any other examples or comments about technical or design bias that you may have seen or you may have experienced?
In my previous job, it was an interesting case of the design team. I was a production team making 3D models. The design team that made the software we were working on designed a version where I think in mind, they were thinking of the customer as the hospitals that eventually receive the models we make, rather than my department who was using the software. And many problems came out of it.
Absolutely. Yes. Great example. Cool. Oh yeah, like clothing is the great and classic example of we're building for a norm. And unfortunately, our norm often is not what should actually be the norm. Cool, cool. Okay. Next question is, what diversity of perspective do you bring to the table? Is there anything either in your stereotype that you want to share or something that's not in your stereotype, something where you're like, okay, I stereotypically like fit into this box of XYZ individual, but this is a diversity of perspective that I can bring to a team? Anyone have any ideas on that one?
I have one. So
Yep.
I come from a family of 13. I'm one of 13. So like I always kind of bring that up during my interview because I always think that it actually shows that I actually have like the ability to kind of work with all different types of personalities. I feel like I have a lot, my brothers and sisters are all very different people and all have very different kind of like wants and needs. And I feel like I know how to kind of, especially because I'm actually number 11, so I'm farther down. So I had to deal with all these older brothers and sisters. And I feel like I kind of have a way of kind of dealing with and navigating around all different types of personality types. But at the same time, we still have to kind of work as a unit, you know, like when we were growing up, making dinner was kind of like a small army, right? So, if I had to like peel, 13 potatoes, or I had to like, you know what I mean? We all had to kind of divvy up tasks. And so communication and understanding where your role fits in the greater scope of teamwork, I feel like that's like built into me because of my big family.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone have anything else on that one? Cool. Go for it.
I personally tend to be a pain in the butt for software and other kinds of hardware controls for left-handed people, because I'm usually in the minority in the department, but there are definitely pain points when all of the hotkeys are like P and O and the right shift key.
Absolutely. Left-handedness for sure. Anything else?
My name is Marquis, and this one kind of confused me of what the question was. Even aside from being a Black male, I think most of us can relate. Just having a non-traditional tech background, I think, is a really big one as well, from a diversity or perspective.
Absolutely. I think that that's huge, having a non-tech background. Particularly relevant, like at App Academy, there is certain assumptions that we might have about people that are coming into the program. And like, I had never coded before I came to App Academy. I didn't even know how to open up a terminal. And the first reading that I had was like, run these commands in your bash terminal. And I was like, I'm sorry, what are you asking for me? So absolutely, when building out products, like thinking about, this is the perspective, like this is the background that I'm bringing into my understanding of that one. Super true. Awesome. Okay, pivoting a little bit, what are some things that we can look for where there's likely to be some technical bias on a team? Or how can we assess a product to see if there is that technical bias? I'm combining the third and last question if you're looking at the questions right now. Absolutely. Colton said in the chat, vast real world testing, for sure. Once it gets onto market, like vast real world testing, for sure the way to go. Anyone else? Yes, Danny also said, look at the diversity on the team. If it's not diverse, it's more likely that there's bias. Yes, I'm gonna nitpick that a little bit. Sorry, Danny. I'm gonna say it's not more likely that there's bias, but it's more likely that it's not gonna be caught. Because no matter what your team's gonna look like you're gonna have bias on that team. But if you're all coming from the same perspective, you're not gonna recognize that. You're not gonna be like, oh, that inherent belief you have, I don't share it. So absolutely, though, the less diverse a team is, the less likely it is that that bias or those flaws are going to be caught. Anyone else want to share on that one?
I was going to say, as an engineer, like, we're always supposed to kind of look for the edge cases. And so if we kind of have edge cases in mind, we should be able to kind of catch a lot of the bias that exists, just by logic, just by being able to be like, hey, how can we look at this like a data structure or an algorithm and see what edge case this doesn't really fit into? Like the left-handed one, I'm right-handed. I never even thought about that. But when she mentioned that earlier, I was like, oh my God, it's so true. Like if I was left-handed, I'd be so pissed off. So, if you look at the edge cases, that's like a perfect edge case of like, hey, there's a lot of left-handed people, So anyway, just focusing on edge cases, I feel like would be important.
Absolutely. Focusing on edge cases is huge and helpful. Anyone else want to throw something in?
I don't know if he wanted to, or if you want to speak up, Casey, just let me know. But in our breakout room, one of the guys, Casey, brought up that because of the internet, you have so many different groups that are advocates for people that are differently abled or might, have been born physically differently or are non-conforming in some way. And being able to like reach them is actually pretty easy, and we should be able to listen to them.
Absolutely. There are lots of resources on this kind of thing. A great example is accessibility. So screen readers, color blindness, things like that. I'm almost I just didn't think about when I started coding. Like I built out my full stack and I was like, oh, so pretty. Found out later that the font that I use, very pretty, very bad for people that are dyslexic to be able to parse apart what's saying. But there's loads of information out there about the best fonts that you can use, the best ways to implement big shifts in color so that it's easy to see differences across different websites. Lots of information about how to make your code as parsable as possible for screen readers. And from a legal compliance standpoint, we have to do that. It's something that a lot of companies just actually aren't legally compliant on. But as you're in the workforce, it's something that is incredibly helpful to be able to go through and go, okay, in my HTML, I'm gonna use this instead of this in order to make it more accessible. Cool. Anything else that people wanna add before we get to the last question? And I have 2 more slides. Awesome. Last question, and I threw this one in because I think this is my favorite kind of thing to think about, is do you think we should be able to see the data that AI is learning from or see the code that's making those decisions in order to assess for bias? Or should that information remain proprietary? Are we comfortable with information that's making decisions for us to remain private? Casey said yes. Is that a yes, it should remain proprietary, or yes?
I think it's terrifying to think of like an algorithm like making decisions for, you know, my friends and anybody actually. So yeah, definitely there should be transparency and there should be guidelines.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dave, inside with a hand raised. Go for it.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Casey on that point. Like, I still remember the court case in regarding the Supreme Court case where it went all the way to the Supreme Court because it was basically biasing certain individuals for sentencing. And I think that like programming on that regards, because you have like this scenario where you want to protect your proprietary code, but at the same time, you have people's lives at stake. And so I think that code that's being put in a situation where it's public office type of roles, I think the rules should be changed and there should be regulations so that that code is no longer proprietary. It's not a business anymore at that point. You're serving the government, you're doing something to serve the people. And as a result, you know, the government would give you kickbacks in certain ways or whatever, but the code should be transparent because this isn't something that is a business at that point. It's something that's affecting someone's life, you know?
Awesome. I said something in the chat that I'm going to read aloud, then I'll take Chris's point, and then we will wrap up. So I said, I think one of the issues we've been discussing is implicit bias that isn't spotted. If the data is not transparent, then it's no better than a non-diverse team. So yes, totally agree with that. And I'm going to talk about HIPAA in 1 second, actually. So excellent point, Aya. Chris, go for it.
Howdy, y'all. So I'm going to take what I'm pretty sure is going to be the dissenting opinion here. So I don't know if I'm comfortable with the idea of across the board saying that we need to have transparency in the data that people are pulling in for the exclusive reason that the tech industry is so close and kind of cutthroat that the difference between where you're sourcing your data and what kind of data points you're looking for could be the difference between your company succeeding versus failing or being absorbed into a larger, more established company. I think we all recognize that these biases are things that we need to check out for and take care of. And I would be more comfortable with the idea of maybe having some sort of federal or maybe even you could try a market-based review organization that audits these different things to make sure that you have that you're not like kind of falling into bias traps. But to say just open the doors and make everything open, I think could do a lot of damage to the industry as we're preparing to enter into it. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Absolutely, excellent points. This is a very complex issue, and from my perspective, healthcare, looking at AI algorithms that are used to diagnose healthcare issues is really problematic because a lot of the data that we have is on men. Not even is it just on men, but all the way down to the cellular level. When we're doing drug trials, we're doing drug trials on male cells, and female cells literally do not react the same way. And so looking at that data set and going, okay, we've learned from all of this data, we can't have it be accessible because it's patient data, it's healthcare data. What do we do there? Ben, I saw that you wanted to say something, so go for it, and then I'll do my last slide.
Oh, sure. I was just gonna say, like, I've read up a lot on like how these AI work and like genetic algorithms and other things like that. Like a lot of that is kind of like a magic box in between the data and what outcome it actually comes up with. So it's very difficult for anybody to even like parse the thread that goes through to figure out how it is. So actually seeing the data would be like the only way you could possibly see how there's some kind of bias, because the actual algorithm itself is, I mean, that's literally a new job market of people actually parsing the data in the actual algorithm. So like, it's a really tricky subject, but I have to agree with the other gentleman who just said, like, you know, it's a cutthroat business as well. So it's kind of like, you have to have some kind of middle ground between the two. I think that regulation is really where the only really solution for that. But that's my opinion.
Absolutely. No, we can definitely, I think this is the most fascinating topic, like going into the weeds of how do you even regulate for something like this? Who are the people that look at that data? The idea of like algorithms really are black boxes. There's a whole team at IBM that's dedicated to figuring out like where's the best place to correct for bias in the data. Should we correct in the data set itself? Should we correct before it goes into the algorithm? Should we make adjustments after it comes out of the algorithm to figure out like what the best place to make these changes are, even just acknowledging that there's an issue. So super fascinating. If you want to talk about it more, reach out on LinkedIn. I'll chat all day. But last thing that I wanted to talk about before we send you off to do some coding, good questions to ask can help mitigate these issues. What's the diversity in the technical team? What does the review process to assess the functionality of products look like? And what are the demographics and characteristics of the end user? So good luck. Reach out if you have any questions. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. Do send me a message so that I know where we met. And that's also my email. So if you're interested in shooting me an email or you had any lingering questions, please feel free to reach out.